recording. I'm rolling. Monica, before you were introduced to the life model, tell me what you thought about the word maturity.
I think my only experience with the word maturity as before the life model had a lot to do, maybe even with when I was younger. And I remember being at junior high, being like, oh, these boys are so immature. And thinking about, just I'm mature, you're not, or you're mature and I'm not. And just as almost like it's a slam or a dig for someone if you say, you're acting so immature, you're very immature. And like maybe even like a relational positioning to try to get yourself in a more powerful position, to be able to say somebody's mature, maturity is yada yada. And so learning about the life model has created a totally different lens in terms of the word maturity and really what it is. And I know that as therapists, we always go back to Erickson's developmental chart to see the stages of maturity growth, right? And so there is a lens that most of us, even in our culture, who have some education in a psychology class in high school or in college, have learned this developmental chart, right? And so we can see, hey, everybody's supposed to go through stages of maturity development. We're supposed to be an infant. And when we're an infant, great. You look young, you act young, and you're cute. So we accept all the immaturity that you have to offer, and we expect it. We don't expect you to act like a 15-year-old when you're 2. And then you go to that next stage of child level development, 4 to 12, and you think, okay, yeah, we expect a 5-year-old to act like a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old to act like a 10-year-old. But when a 10-year-old acts like a 2-year-old and they don't have that same 2-year-old toddler cuteness, it becomes annoying for the people around. And the same, if you're a 65-year-old and you're acting more like a 20-year-old, where people get a little annoyed and frustrated with that process. And so Life Model has helped me with a different type of lens to see the word maturity through. And it's not just a psychological lens, it's also a spiritual lens, right? So if we blend the psychology and the spirituality in terms of that word maturity, we can understand that, of course, we're supposed to grow. Like in a perfect world, in the Garden of Eden, there would have been like this developmental process and we would have all grown perfectly because we would have had all the things we needed, right? Relationally, all the things that God intended when he designed a human. But in this fallen world that we live in the world where there is sin and there's malfunction, there's trauma, there's disasters, there's pain that we experience, our maturity growth stagnates. And, for a human, when we experience somebody else's immaturity, right, or we experience our own immaturity, we have a lack of tolerance. Psychologically, we have a lack of tolerance, and it's difficult for us. But from a spiritual lens, the Life Model teaches us that our maturity isn't a place of our value. Our ability to mature doesn't make us more or less valuable. And that is a total mind warp for me, and it's been huge to be able to talk about this with myself and with my clients, for us to be tender to our own weakness, which I think kind of filters through a lot of different therapeutic modalities, like even internal family systems talks about that idea of being gentle to the parts of self, that if we're not gentle to ourselves, we can't grow. We'll get stuck because we have judgment and shame that doesn't allow us to mature. But when it comes to Life Model, there is a sense of understanding that I'm not valuable based on where I am in my maturity. I'm valuable based on my existence. That is a supernatural concept. That's a God thing. God honors each human. And it's common for me to say in a therapy session, this is a bizarre concept, but imagine God values Billy Graham as much as he values somebody who is raped and murdered and is in prison. Like, that's a mind warp. That's something that as humans we can't conceptualize, that we aren't valued based on our behaviors, that we aren't valuable based on our what we do, our performance. That's grace. That's grace. And grace is a bizarre concept for us as humans. We judge ourselves and we judge others based on our maturity or what we can produce versus just the fact that we're human. And that if we are going to grow in maturity, it doesn't make us more valuable, yet it is our task. And I've heard Dr. Wilder say in a couple different venues that salvation is a gift. It's something that we get. It's free. And we just get it. It's not based on any works, right? That's what the word says. It says, not, our salvation is a gift. We don't get it based on our performance. But maturity is our task. It's our job. Maturity is the sanctification process. So we are positioned to mature. We want to be able to do that, but not to make ourselves more valuable. So that really messes with us as humans because we are so focused on performance and doing the thing that makes us feel good about ourselves. And then we feel shame when we don't do the thing that we don't feel good about. And so I think as therapists, when we approach our clients with this concept, it is a left brain concept. We need to be able to understand it. But how do we show it? What's the experiential aspect of teaching clients about maturity? I think as a therapist that it's about my own ability to mature. And if I am mature, then if I'm maturing, if I'm filling in those developmental gaps for myself, then I'm not judging people based on their maturity. I'm not valuing them. There's this thing that happens to us as therapists where we enjoy talking to one client maybe more than we enjoy talking to another. We look forward to seeing that client. Why is that? Is it because that client's more mature? Because they're easier to tolerate? It's because their weaknesses aren't rubbing us in a certain way? And if we're truly mature, will we enjoy people the same way God does? Because God enjoys everyone. God doesn't look down at us and go, oh, you're so mature, I can't be around you. I think that's even a funny concept, right? Like to think that God's looking down at us like, oh, I don't know, I have to put up with Monica again today. She's asking for all this stuff, and then he's annoyed. Like, that's just not a thing. Yet, as humans, we do that. We say, oh, that person's extra grace required, or they're really difficult, or they're hard to get along with. It's a common thing for therapists to go, oh, that person with that type of personality disorder is so difficult to tolerate. And when we see maturity through a life model lens, really it's through a biblical lens, through a God lens, through an Emmanuel lens. We don't value or devalue people based on their maturity, even if they're older and they should be more mature. We value them based on the fact that they exist. We align with the way that God thinks about humans, and that anything that rubs us wrong or that triggers us, we are able to see there's a gap for me. There's a growth place for me. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity. Throughout the Life Model curriculum, it speaks about how we want to put ourselves in these types of positions. And Joy starts here, it's called the transformation zone. We want to put ourselves in positions where there are multiple levels of maturity in the same group, where we have people who have achieved eldership or at least are pseudo-elders, that they can model healthy, mature behaviors, and then people who have very immature behaviors, immaturity gaps, and that we're not valuing and wanting to be around one person more than another, that we want to be around everyone. And so I think that as we apply that in our therapeutic settings as therapists, it has so much to do with, am I challenging that part within myself? So that when the client comes into the room, do they feel enjoyed? Do they feel like I really enjoy them? I know, and one of the Joy Streams podcasts, I think one of the authors of Living from the Heart talks about maturity. I think her name was Anne something, I can't think of it right now, but she talks about maturity, and she says at one point in her initial counseling practice, there was a man coming to therapy with her, and he was, I think, homeless and living under a bridge, and just really had some difficult things about his presentation and maturity gaps that made him difficult for people to enjoy. Yet she enjoyed him so much, and maybe she wasn't the best fit for him in terms of her training or whatever, but the whole team of therapists agreed, no, you need to see this man for therapy because you have this delight in him, and when he comes into the room, he knows that he's enjoyed. And that's who we want to be as therapists. We want to be able to enjoy the clients. We want them to feel like they are delighted in. And I can't remember which book it's that Wilder says this, but he says that we can grow and mature when someone who is more mature than us can delight in us, even in our weakness. Even in our weakness, we're delightful. I believe that's why the life model and really getting these concepts, really absorbing them and becoming and growing in these ways, it is the ability to self-propagate joy. It's a self-propagating joy movement. And that's where I think we can start to talk about how it interacts with addiction, right? Because if joy is going to self-propagate, it's because we've got mature people who are doing our work in the culture, so that when we encounter people who have severe, significant maturity gaps, and that shouldn't be there because they're older, they should have matured by now, that we are able to enjoy them so much, they can be delighted in so much, that they've never experienced anything like that before. It is so exciting to them to be able to have experienced that. They feel so, it's that interpersonal neurobiology, that that's created, that energy system that's created in a one-on-one or in a group, that person's whole nervous system feels at rest and at peace in a way that it never has experienced before. Because we're becoming so like Christ, because we're maturing, we're facing our own gaps, we're becoming true elders. So when people come into our presence, when our clients come into our presence, they feel that sense of enjoyment. They feel that sense that I'm delighted in. That gives me hope, right? The client can then feel, I have hope for facing the things that I didn't have hope for. And it speaks to attachment, right? It speaks to the reparenting experience that a therapist can do with a client. When sometimes people are coming into our spaces, they've never been enjoyed before. Their attachment pain is so deep, and no wonder they're stuck in addiction. No wonder they can't get out of it. They don't have hope for what that could look like. They don't have an attachment. And as therapists, we can be the aroma of Christ. We can be someone who really loves, who really sees someone through the lens of their true identity, even if they never, ever, ever act like that. So maturity is a huge pillar of life model. It's part of the 5 to Thrive. Like, if we're able to be in a place where we feel like we belong, and we're giving and receiving in mutually satisfying ways, then we can fill in those maturity gaps. We can learn, we can get to that next stage, even if we have deep gaps in our infant and child level development, but we cannot do that without mature elder brains. And I think that's what we're called to as therapists, to get our brains mature enough to really delight even in things that are very weak.